It was shortly after 3 p.m., and across the street, a panicked guy was knocking on a neighbor's door, clutching a dying little girl. Her corpse was limp, cold, and battered beyond recognition. "She isn't breathing. Please help." The man's voice shook throughout the 911 call. Can you image the fear in his voice as he struggled for oxygen, yearning for aid, while clutching her tiny body and attempting to save a kid who had already died? What struck the cops who came first was not simply the spectacle of a scared guy attempting to play the hero, but the devastation to her body. A small body ripped apart in ways no one should ever have to see. Bruises in areas that should not have been touched. Skin was gone in unexpected places. Even experienced policemen had to turn away. What is the worst part? The guy who pretended to help her was the one who had inflicted such torment on her. What happened to Koralynn Marie Pfister, a small girl whose brilliant eyes and happy soul were snatched away long before she had the opportunity to mature into the person she may have become? She was just 2 years old. Her life ended at the residence on West Oakview Street. But how did it get to this? What really was going behind those walls? This case delves deeper than simply the surface. The investigation, the courtroom drama, and the falsehoods will all unfold before your very eyes. We'll put together the tale step by agonizing step, and maybe, just maybe, we'll figure out what caused the most devastating result. However, this narrative is about more than simply a crime. It's about choices, manipulation, and whether we can genuinely trust those closest to us. Hold on tight, because you're about to hear a tale that will challenge everything you thought you understood about justice, deception, and treachery. Welcome to Unseen True Crime Stories HQ. I thank you, my viewers, most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. So let's get started. Koralynn Marie Pfister, or Monkey, as she was affectionately known. They lovingly dubbed her that since she was always climbing, exploring, and full of activity. A 2-year-old bundle of joy with a grin that could light up any room. A small girl who, like any other child her age, adored dinosaur chicken nuggets and could often be seen running about with a twinkle in her eyes, an infectious smile, and a naughty grin that indicated she was up to something exciting. Koralynn was so innocent, full of life, and carefree. She had not even scraped the surface of the globe. She hadn't even started to explore what life has to offer. She was just starting to find out who she was, playing, learning, and being loved. It's terrible how fast her tale transitioned from one of innocence to tragedy. But for the time being, let us remember her smiling and climbing those joyful memories that she deserved more of. Imagine a beautiful day when the sun is just about to set and Koralynn is climbing everything in sight in the backyard. It wasn't really a huge deal. She was simply a young girl doing what little girls do, enjoying the basic pleasures of youth. Every time her mother, Becky, looked at her, she felt a sense of pride and affection for her daughter as she grew, laughed, and explored. The kind of love that only a parent understands. Becky would warn, "Watch out, little monkey. Don't fall." Koralynn would just chuckle and keep going, her enthusiasm contagious. But, like with many tales, there is another side to the picture. Koralynn's life has not always been easy. Her parents, Becky and David, did not remain together. They met in 2008 under seemingly ideal circumstances. David relocated from Iowa to Washington to be with Becky. They were optimistic. They were prepared to build a life together. However, life does not always go as planned. David worked long hours and did all he could to make it work. Becky remained at home with Koralynn and her elder sister, attempting to keep things together. Things appeared good at first, but life gave them curveballs they didn't expect. In August 2011, David lost his job, and the fractures in their relationship began to emerge. It was just too much to manage. They separated up in February 2012 when bills and stress built up. They decided to share custody of Koralynn. David would have her on Wednesdays and Thursdays, while Becky would have her for the rest of the week. For a time, it seemed like they were co-parenting well, doing their best in a tough position. But let's be honest, when life throws you a curveball, things get messy. Becky began to distance herself from David, who was more than simply her ex-husband. He was Koralynn's father, and, like any parent, he wanted to be there in his daughter's life. He wanted to make sure she was okay. He wanted to see her grow up, to see her rise, and to share those memories. However, Becky eventually stopped responding to his messages. She became aloof, and David started to feel a profound feeling of dread that his daughter was drifting away from him in ways he couldn't control. He was doing his best, but no matter how hard you try, you might lose contact with the people you care about. By April 2012, tensions had risen. David hadn't heard from Koralynn in weeks, and he realized he couldn't wait any longer. He arrived up to the residence. It was Monday, and he asked to see his daughter. But Becky said no. She refused to let him take her. Koralynn, however, was listening. When she heard her father's voice, she began to wail loudly. When she wept, Becky, unable to ignore it, gave in. She let David take Koralynn for a brief visit, believing it was no great thing. But David's visit was the last time he saw his daughter alive. He had no clue that in those few days, Koralynn was falling into a predicament that no kid should ever confront. Becky had let someone else move into their home. James Maurice Reeder, her new live-in lover. He wasn't just any man. He was a guy with a violent background. The sorrow lies in the fact that David was unaware of this. Koralynn's father had no idea his daughter was being harmed. He believed she was safe. He felt she was okay. And when David finally got to see his daughter again, he'd never view her the same way again. When we reflect on Koralynn's brief existence, we can't help but feel a range of emotions. On the one hand, she was the happy young girl who liked to climb and eat chicken nuggets. She was the kid every parent dreams of, full of hope and excitement. On the other hand, she was stuck in the center of a disaster, torn between two worlds, her loving father and a mother who was doing her best, but was also sucked into the manipulation of a guy who would go to any extent to get control. Koralynn's life did not have to end in this manner. It should never have happened. On the surface, James Maurice Reeder seemed like any other person with a dazzling grin and slick chat. He knows how to make people feel special. For Becky Hupel, that was all it needed. She was dealing with a broken relationship and the stress of parenting two children on her alone. When James entered her life, he appeared like a lifeline, promising to take care of everything. He was more than simply a lover. He was a partner who cooked, cleaned, and cared for her children. Becky must have felt like it was a dream come true to finally have someone to share the load. For a little while, everything seemed to be going well, but there were flaws in his compassionate veneer. James was not the unselfish helper he seemed to be. He knew what he was doing. He was manipulating. His appeal was more than simply being liked. It was also about obtaining control. He began taking control of Becky's life as soon as he entered it. Becky's reliance on him developed gradually, and it became difficult to distinguish between her wants and his control. Every choice he made for her, every barrier he violated, strengthened the web he was creating around her. And she didn't see it at first. James proposed taking on additional responsibilities, stating he was just trying to assist. He had his own children, after all, so why shouldn't he assist Becky with hers? But soon, Becky noticed a slight difference in their relationship. James was making decisions rather than just assisting. He made decisions for her children, supervised their activities, and gradually separated her from the outside world. Becky disregarded it. She trusted him more and more, rejecting her instincts that something was wrong. But James had a history that was not as pure as he claimed. His ex-girlfriends shared accusations of deception and violence. James snatched their phones, accused them of cheating, and when they refused, he grew aggressive. One ex even claimed to have suffocated and raped her soon after she gave birth. These were things James did not disclose to Becky. After all, he was portraying the loving, loyal spouse. And Becky, anxious for assistance, never questioned him. However, manipulation usually intensifies. It's never a little matter. It's a pattern that keeps building until it reaches a breaking point. James' hold over Becky became stronger, and by the time she recognized what was going on, it was too late. Her daughter, Koralynn, had already been entangled in the web. James had gained control of the most crucial aspects of her life, which she could not afford to lose. And then was the tipping point, the moment everything came crashing down. Becky never had a chance. She couldn't see how the guy she had trusted had gradually transformed into the predator who would permanently alter her life and her daughter's destiny. The bruises began appearing. Initially, Becky disregarded them. She was just a mother trying to make sense of everything. Oh, she must have fallen, she reminded herself. Perhaps she ran into something. However, with each fresh mark and bruise, Becky began to experience an unpleasant sensation that something was awry. But she was overly trusting of James. She was not prepared to face the reality. Koralynn's grief, worry, and perplexity were growing quietly under the surface. Becky disregarded it. She didn't want to accept the reality, since it would imply she had allowed things to happen. That was the part she couldn't handle. Becky Hupel had another regular day. She got up, packed her belongings, and left the home at 12:30 p.m. to do whatever tasks were required. But that day, May 24th, 2012, would alter everything. She left her 2-year-old daughter, Koralynn, with her boyfriend, James. What should have been a straightforward day for a mother to go out for a little while rapidly turned into a nightmare. James was there, correct? A guy who looked to have it all together. A guy who has always been so helpful, correct? He refused to let anything happen. At least, that's what he wanted everyone to think. So, when Becky departed, James decided to give Koralynn a bath. And here's when things get odd enough to make you doubt everything he says. He just went out for a minute to get a towel, he claims. 1 minute. That's what you say when you don't want people to ask too many questions. That's the type of justification people make to cover things up. And here's the thing. Why didn't he contact 911 from his home? Why hurry Koralynn to the neighbor's porch, give CPR, and beg them to call for aid when he could have done it himself from his front door? Why wait? Why the delay? When the neighbors answered the door, the horror started to unravel. Koralynn's small corpse, unclothed, limp, and dead, was set down on the porch while James feverishly attempted to resuscitate her. And here's when things become much worse. Koralynn wasn't just unresponsive. She wasn't just in a sad accident. Her physique conveyed a different narrative, a horrible one. When emergency personnel arrived at the scene, they saw more than just a drowned toddler in a bathtub. They saw abuse. She suffered blunt force damage to the head. Bruises covered her petite frame. Burns and cuts in areas where children should never be handled. Skin is gone from her legs and toes. Her skin was split apart, as if it had been intentionally peeled away. This wasn't just a drowning. This was not only an unfortunate accident. This was a brutal action. And then it struck the authorities, the lie. James' narrative unfolded before their eyes. He had stated that Koralynn had drowned. He told everyone he had left the room for a minute, and when he returned, she had slid into the water. However, his tale, like the kid he claimed to care for, broke apart in that moment. This was not an accident. This was the culmination of months of control, manipulation, and abuse. A life ended in the most horrific manner. And while the emergency crew worked on Koralynn, attempting in vain to save her, the truth was staring them in the face. But the worst aspect, the most heartbreaking element, the one that lingered with the authorities long after they left the site, was that Koralynn had already died before James ever considered calling for aid. Her body temperature was alarmingly low. She had very likely been dead for many hours before James showed any concern. Now, think about it for a second. Imagine how terrified Koralynn must have felt. Her body was damaged, and her soul had already been shattered. However, when it came time for James to act, he did nothing. He lied. He postponed. And he tried all he could to hide the truth. And for what? To protect his own skin. We don't completely understand the emotional toll this case placed on everyone involved, from detectives to first responders. They had seen abuse before, but this was different. Something much darker. Nonetheless, they had to keep going, putting together the facts, even as their hearts hurt for the young girl who would never get to live her life. You cannot alter the past, but you can learn from it. And the fact is that this tale isn't over. It's only the beginning. His narrative of a drowning kid was beginning to seem like a cover-up, with an explanation so convenient that it was difficult to accept. But it wasn't simply the injuries Koralynn sustained that day. It was about the pattern. The farther authorities dug into James's background, the more it became evident that this wasn't his first violent outburst. They started chatting to his ex-girlfriends, and the pieces of the jigsaw began to fit together. James was not new to violence. He has a history of abuse. One ex told officers that he accused her of infidelity, controlled her every move, and became physically abusive when she refused to comply. One lady even told a frightening tale of how James strangled and raped her only days after giving birth to their kid. This was not the image of a compassionate spouse who was just trying to assist. No, this was the tale of a guy who had concealed his actual character for far too long. But here's what astonished everyone. Koralynn's mother, Becky Hupel, was initially unaware of the reality. She was originally informed of the awful situation in the same way that anybody else would have been. Her daughter was discovered comatose in the bathtub, with no one understanding how it occurred. But as she listened, her own tale became more disjointed. How could she have not known? How could she have let James into their lives and Koralynn's life when he had been alone with her so many times? As investigators began interviewing Becky, they began to wonder whether she was involved in all of this. Did she really understand the sort of guy James was? Was she too emotionally persuaded to recognize the truth? Did she trust James' account of events? Or was she just too terrified to confront what had really occurred? Becky's role would be questioned, and rightly so. She had not spotted the warning indications. She hadn't seen how James was gradually taking control of her, driving Koralynn out of the picture and closing her off from the outside world. But was this her fault? Was she prepared to turn a blind eye to her daughter's suffering? Or was she just too caught up in her own fears and desire for someone to depend on? It's difficult to say. Becky was a mother who wanted the best for her children, but she had landed herself in the center of a nightmare. She was unable to spot the predator in her own house, because predators do not always wear the masks we expect them to. He was finally captured and brought to court. The courtroom was tense. James' readers sat there, stone-faced, while the prosecution went over the horrific circumstances of Koralynn's killing one by one. Homicide by maltreatment, rape, possession of meth. The accusations were read, and there was a fleeting glimpse of what might have been guilt. However, it was swiftly supplanted by a defensive stance. The guy who had stolen so much from Koralynn, Becky, and so many others is now seeking to hide behind legal language. But here's the thing. James understood what he was doing. He was not going to combat these allegations in the manner you would imagine. He went a different way. James pled guilty, but not in the manner we had hoped. He accepted an Alford plea. An Alford plea permits a person to recognize the facts against them without admitting actual guilt. In essence, it is a plea in which the defendant is aware that they will be found guilty, but is not required to explicitly confess it. It is a means for someone to avoid confronting the reality while accepting the consequences. James was aware that the police would eventually catch up with him, but he was unwilling to face the consequences of his actions. That's what struck the hardest. We're here in a courtroom, and James, the guy who murdered an innocent kid and harmed so many others, was permitted to avoid explicitly confessing to the worst of it. He might have had a new start. How is that justice? How can someone like him, with such a violent history, escape bearing the full consequences of his actions? Then came the judgment. The punishment was given out, and it was evident that Koralynn did not get the justice she deserved. James got a sentence of 37.5 years in jail, with a possibility of release. Worst of all, he was not required to register as a sex offender. This was a guy who had raped a kid and destroyed a mother's heart, yet the justice system allowed him to walk free one day. How is this even possible? You see, the problem wasn't only with James. The faulty system enabled him to slip through the gaps for so long. For a crime this awful to get such a term, it begs the question, where was the actual justice? Where was the genuine accountability for the lives he destroyed? For a minute, the court fell quiet as everyone struggled to process what had just transpired. Did you think this phrase was enough? It didn't seem that way to anybody who was watching and recognized the gravity of the catastrophe. Becky came next. This is the moment we have all been waiting for. How about her? She was charged with criminal abuse for her involvement in Koralynn's death, although the allegations were far less serious than James. A year and a day in prison. To be honest, it did not sit well with many individuals. Is that justice for a mother who ignored her daughter's pain? Shouldn't she have been held more responsible for her role in all of this? However, many individuals believe that the sentencing was too light. Was 1 year enough for a mother who failed to safeguard her child? Was that enough, given how much suffering and anxiety Koralynn had faced in her dying months? Would additional time have helped? Some suggested that Becky's cognitive problems influenced the choice. She was not the best at identifying the risks around her. But does it justify her allowing her daughter to be alone with someone like James? She was responsible for protecting her children, and she failed. Some would argue that she wasn't psychologically capable of noticing the indications. But is it enough to absolve her part in Koralynn's plight? Should she have been given more time and understanding? Should she have been held more accountable for her actions? The public was split on this, which made the situation difficult to resolve. Becky wasn't a criminal genius, but she was nevertheless involved in what transpired. Many people found it difficult to accept the decision. It didn't seem like she had been held responsible. Some thought she deserved more time. After all, her refusal to intervene resulted in Koralynn's death. So where does this leave us? What does justice look like when there is so much ambiguity? When two persons are implicated, but only one bears the full brunt of the law? How do we strike a balance when someone like James, who has a history of violence and abuse, receives such a lenient sentence, but Becky, who failed to protect her kid, receives so little? The reality is there is no definitive solution, and that is why this case remains so tragically unsolved. Koralynn's life had been taken, and no penalty could bring her back. It is not just about what transpired in court. It's about what may have happened. The reaction of the community was nothing short of sad. A candlelight vigil was conducted in memory of Koralynn, a ray of light in an otherwise gloomy world. People gathered at Washington Park, carrying flickering candles, their faces lit by the soothing light. Everyone present was saddened by the passing of a young child they never fully knew. The tributes were modest but powerful, expressions of love and sadness. Koralynn wasn't merely a victim. She was a symbol of something larger, which we all should have defended. Her burial, conducted discreetly on June 16, 2012, was a modest, melancholy occasion, a sorrowful reflection of a life taken too soon. The community mourned not just Koralynn's death, but also the flawed system that enabled it to happen. So, should Becky be held liable for Koralynn's death? Or was she just another victim of James' manipulation? Was she complicit, or was she just caught up in a scenario she couldn't see? Please share your ideas in the comments below. I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? If you feel compelled to keep these tales alive and give these victims a voice, please subscribe to the channel. Your support is invaluable, and it allows us to continue telling the stories that need to be told. Don't forget to click the bell button to never miss out on future instances. Together, we can ensure that the truth is not buried. Thank you for watching, and until the next time, take care.